Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for today's Thoughts Reappraisal tutorial. We are here in honor of World Mental Health Day 2023, and our goal is to provide some information to help support the awareness and decrease the stigma around mental health. My name is Ashley Moser. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and a certified eating disorder specialist with the Renfrew Center. And I am going to take some time today to outline what I hope will be a really helpful piece in supporting anyone's mental health, whether you're struggling, feel like you've got a handle on things. Focusing on our thoughts is going to help enhance our overall well-being. So thank you for taking your time out of your day to focus on your well-being. And because this is an on-demand opportunity, I want to encourage everyone to feel like you can stop this, go back, pause, take a minute to reflect, write notes, use this in a way that's going to feel helpful for you. So please, the on-demand feature is a great feature because it does give you the chance to be in the driver's seat of how you use today's information. So without further ado, let's dive in. So why have a tutorial on thoughts? The why behind this is because I cannot tell you how many people I have spoken to in my years of providing therapy that seek out therapy for the exact reason of saying, I don't want to think this way anymore, or I wish I could just think differently. A lot of people feel like thoughts are a huge driving factor in their mental health and their well-being. And if I could just think differently, then maybe I could feel differently. I don't disagree with those thoughts. Thinking differently can absolutely have an influence on how we feel and how we show up in the world. Thoughts are one of three components we'll talk about that make up an emotional experience. But because so many people seek out support with their thoughts, specifically around mental health, I thought that would make today's topic that much more helpful. So, especially as we're celebrating World Mental Health Day. As I mentioned, thoughts are one component of an emotional experience. If we think about feeling our emotional experiences, sometimes we experience them as like a big, overwhelming feeling, like a cloud or like a rush. And it's hard to know exactly what's happening for us and really tease apart, what am I feeling and why am I feeling this way? I find that the three components of emotion can be a great visual way to help better understand how we're feeling, especially when we're in the midst of feeling it. I want to note that there's these three components include physical sensations, which is what we physically feel in our body when we feel an emotion, our behaviors and urges, which is what we do and what we want to do when we feel an emotion, and our thoughts. And I highlighted this little bubble in this circle in particular because that's what we're going to focus on in this tutorial. Thoughts are one of three components that make up an emotional experience. And our thoughts are typically the part of the emotion that almost feels like we have like a narrator or like those thought bubbles that come out of our head. What are we thinking when we feel an emotional experience? And as you can see, there's these little red arrows, and it really highlights the fact that all of these three components have a reciprocal relationship with each other. And when I say reciprocal, I mean they have a relationship that influences each other. Our thoughts influence how we feel physically in our body. How we physically feel in our body influences our thoughts. And that goes for every other component and relationship in this component of emotion. So with that foundation laid, I want to talk more and dig in on the thoughts. The thoughts that we're going to be focusing in on today, especially the reappraisal component, is paying attention to those automatic appraisals. And when I say automatic appraisal, I mean your first knee-jerk thought that you have about a situation, a person, a place, a thing. It's the knee-jerk first automatic thought that we have. Typically, we're not even very conscious of these automatic thoughts. They happen like this. They're automatic, but what also happens with these, they tend to be judgmental. They also tend to be rooted in our core beliefs about ourselves, about people, and about the world around us. When I talk about core beliefs, I mean, these are these really ingrained belief systems that we have about ourselves and the world around us. And the more we believe something, the more we end up seeing it out in our world. So talk about confirmation bias, right? So when I'm talking about confirmation bias, I mean that what we know to be true about the world influences the lens in which we see the information around us. So I'm a visual learner, hence we have all these slides and arrows and circles going on already so far in this tutorial. But I wanted to really show and highlight that core beliefs and automatic appraisals are very much connected. It's very hard to talk about our thoughts without having an understanding as to where they come from. Why do I think this way? Why do I always end up thinking this way? Why do I see most situations this way? It's rooted in our core beliefs. A great example of this is that core belief, I'm not good enough. I think most people have felt that core belief or that thought or that experience at some point in their lives, and maybe some more than others. That core belief, if that exists, that feeling that I'm not good enough, we are more likely to see the data and the world around us and the people who are in relationship with us as confirming that we are not good enough. So the more we believe internally, I'm not good enough, the more we are going to interpret situations to support the fact that we are not good enough. So if I believe I'm not good enough, I put on my lenses, I see the world through the lens that I'm not good enough. So I'm interpreting all these instances to support that fact, which then builds up my core belief that I'm not good enough. Thoughts are really powerful in this example, and I think really highlight the influence that thoughts can have over our mental health and well-being. So if we know that that's true, let's talk about some of the patterns that we know to be true about automatic thoughts. There are two thinking traps that are a part of automatic thoughts. One is considered probability overestimation. That's a big fancy way of saying jumping to conclusions. So this is assuming that an undesirable outcome is more likely to happen than it actually is. I think we've all heard the old adage, if you hear hoof prints or sounds of hoofs, think horses, not zebras. This is a great example of somebody who hears hoof prints and horses and thinks zebras. The likelihood of it being a zebra, I don't know where you live, but the likelihood of it being a zebra where I live, very, very small. However, we're more likely to think that because it's the worst case scenario. And that leads us to our second thinking trap, which is considered catastrophizing. This is worst case scenario thinking and assuming that the worst case scenario is going to happen. That type of thinking can be influenced by our core beliefs. And then, of course, our core beliefs influence those thought patterns, which then reinforce the very core beliefs that started them off. So imagine if you are automatically knee-jerk interpreting all of the things in your world, thinking that the worst case scenario is going to happen, and it's more likely to happen than it actually is. Our thoughts could be very powerful in influencing the intensity of our emotional experience. We're going to be that much more likely to be distressed, anxious, panicking, sad. All of those emotional experiences are just going to be heightened if we assume the worst, and we assume the worst is the most likely to happen. So if we know that automatic appraisals are influenced by our core beliefs, and we know that there are two thinking traps that we very commonly can fall into, what do we do about it? Our knee-jerk, these automatic appraisals are knee-jerk, they're automatic, they feel like they're not even conscious sometimes. So how do I change something that I don't feel like I have a lot of control over? Cognitive flexibility. That is what I'm going to preach and praise and teach in this next section of today's tutorial. Our goal isn't to necessarily say, I want you to stop thinking the worst. You're thinking the worst, and I want you to just think the opposite. This is the worst case scenario. That's where your brain automatically goes, well, just stop that, or stop that and just think positive. How many times have you heard that? Just be positive, just think differently. If it were that easy, if only it were that easy. So our goal is not to get rid of those thoughts or just think the opposite of those thoughts. Our goal is to be flexible. We want to be able to identify when we're falling into the thinking traps. We want to know, this is a worst case scenario thought, or I'm jumping to conclusions. And we then want to move forward and say, I know this is happening. So how can I increase my flexibility? How can I be open to the fact that there could be other possible ways to look at this situation than my initial automatic thought? This is where I lose people sometimes. Sometimes people are like, but my automatic thought feels real. It feels way, way more likely that the worst case scenario is to happen because of the lived experiences that I have. I've been through some things, I've seen some things. The worst case scenario has been true for me. So it's hard to just think differently or tell myself that something else is possible. And that's where I say, I don't ever want you to not acknowledge your lived experience, acknowledge the fact that you've been through things that influence and make it much more likely to believe that the worst is going to happen. I will say, however, it doesn't happen every time. And I think most of us can agree with that. And so can we lean into the possibility that it may not happen every time? And we're not saying to let your guard down and to say that the worst is never going to happen, but can we be open to the fact that the worst could happen and it's possible that other things could happen as well? So how do we become flexible in our thinking? Again, these are automatic, entrenched in our lived experiences sometimes. So how do we change a thought that feels like it's real and feels like it's so quick and automatic and knee-jerk? Well, here's 2 skills. The first is going to be the reappraisal strategy of countering probability overestimation, which is a real fancy way of saying not jumping to conclusions. So we want to reevaluate our jumping to conclusions, and we really want to realistically examine the probability of the worst case outcome happening. We want to look for evidence from the past or present to test how likely this is. So we want to ask ourselves, do I know for certain that the worst case outcome is going to happen? And how can I be sure? Has it happened every single time? You noticed I was doing that just a few minutes ago. If it's happened in the past, could there have been another explanation? And is my fear driven by emotion right now? How much does it feel like this will happen? And what is the true likelihood that this would happen? Earlier today, I was having a conversation of doing exactly this with someone in a session. And what we were talking about was the experience of feeling a physical sensation in the body and jumping to the conclusion that it meant heart attack. Do I want to tell this person that they should never think that a physical sensation in their body means that they could have a heart attack? Absolutely not. If you think you're having a heart attack, head, get the help that you need, jump to that conclusion and go. But in this situation, this was someone who was of perfect health, had never had any health concerns, and has a long history with anxiety. And so because of that, we wanted to use this reappraisal strategy of countering the probability overestimation. So the physical sensation in the body of shortness of breath could mean a heart attack. But is it possible that it could mean something else? Do we know for certain that it was a heart attack? Well, no, we don't. So that could be a reason to seek out help. And how can I be sure? That's how you could. But every single time you felt shortness of breath, has it been a heart attack in the past? Not necessarily. And if it's happened, has there been another explanation? Well, we know it's been anxiety in the past. And my fear of a heart attack, because I've had experiences with family members that have had heart attacks, might be increasing the emotion that I'm experiencing right now. And it feels more like a heart attack because it's been the heart attack for my other family members before. But is there a true likelihood here? Let me go through and look at my medical history. I have had a clean bill of health, a full physical, medical clearance, etc. So this was a situation in which the fear of and the jumping to conclusion of it being a heart attack was the first automatic appraisal. And as we used this countering probability overestimation example and the skill set, we were able to walk that back and decrease the anxiety. Our next reappraisal strategy is decatastrophizing. So again, both of these strategies are to address the 2 thinking traps we've identified. We want to learn to reevaluate the worst, and we again want to realistically examine the evidence based on how you've coped in the past if something has happened. So catastrophic thinking is often in the ability to want to decrease the likelihood we won't be able to cope with something bad if it happens. There's a deep-rooted belief that if something bad happens, the worst case scenario happens, I won't be able to handle it. So I need to prepare myself. What we want to do is start to get rooted in the fact that we can handle when bad things happen, when tough stuff comes our way. It may be hard, it may be challenging, but we are able to be okay. Well, how do we do that? Here's some of the ways that we can ask ourselves these questions to help coach ourselves through these moments. So what is the worst that could happen in this situation, and how bad is that? Has it happened in the past? And if it did, how did you cope with it? How did you handle it? Maybe great, maybe not so great. And if it's never happened, what do you think you would do if it were to happen? Could you live through it if the worst case scenario happened and maybe you didn't feel like you could cope or respond to it? These are the types of questions that are specifically beneficial to questioning and supporting our ability to cope with the worst case scenario. So in our first example, we were working on trying to realistically examine the likelihood that the worst case scenario would happen. And in this situation, we're trying to realistically examine, can we cope with it if it were to happen? So I know I've given you the heart attack example, which was very top of mind for me because of talking about it earlier today, but I'm also going to walk us through 2 examples of how to take what I've just taught and bring it into your day-to-day lives. This might be one of those great times to like pause, write it down, think about how it applies to you. But yes, we're going to go ahead and walk through some actual examples of this now. So something that I encourage everyone to do after this tutorial, whether you pause it, do it, and come back, that's another great option, is to pull out some sort of stimuli from your phone. It can be an image from social media, it can be a text message, it can be something from your day-to-day life. And I'm going to use a lot of technology and phone-based examples, but I feel like there's a lot of good data there. Go ahead and pull something out that's been relevant, something that caused some emotion for you. So maybe it was a text exchange with someone. Maybe it was something that brought up some emotion for you when you witnessed it on social media. I want you to take a moment and identify, what were the automatic appraisals that you have? Did you interpret that to mean that that person wasn't interested or responsive to you because you aren't important, that you're not good enough? Did you see that image of someone on social media and say, they're better than me? I'll never have that. I wish I could be them. And then after you've identified those automatic appraisals, how can you work towards applying what we just talked about, these reappraisal strategies, to come up with another possible interpretation? So if the image was something on social media that brought up a sense of, I wish I were them, maybe that can be your automatic appraisal. Like, I wish I could have those things in my life. What's another possible interpretation? It could be really great to have those things in my life. If I had those things in my life, I may have to give up something in order to have those. Continuing to figure out what are some other possible ways to interpret the information. And again, it doesn't just have to be from one end of the spectrum to the other. It can be a lot of gray in between. So again, sticking with our theme of phone-based appraisals and reappraisals and the richness of information we get from being a society that's very connected to our phones and communicating this way, I want to give 2 examples that I hear often and work with folks through often where we can use appraisals and reappraisals. I think this could be a great thing that you could bring into your life as well. So again, remembering that reappraisals are really asking yourself, what else could be possible? The 2 scenarios I want to walk us through is if someone does not respond to a text, so you're kind of left on red, and always if you're with someone who's just always chronically on their phone. So in our first example, appraisal and reappraisal, we're going to spend time talking about both. So when someone does not respond to a message that we send, we text them, we ask them how they are, we want to meet up with them, and if we don't hear something right away, who doesn't get that initial sense of anxiety? Why haven't they gotten back to me? What's going on here? I think it's a natural question to ask. But do you interpret that as meaning that that person is not interested in you? That it's a rejection? I even hear often people, especially with health anxiety or fear of, worst case scenarios happening when it comes to a loved one, they worry that it means that person's injured, dead on the side of the road in a ditch somewhere, that their lack of response means that they're not okay. I also hear a lot of folks say that they interpret those types of situations as meaning that someone's mad at them, that they're not responding because they've done something wrong. So we can imagine if our automatic appraisal is that someone isn't interested in us, they're rejecting of us, or that they're mad at us, we automatically are filled with a sense of heightened emotion. We're worried that we've done something wrong. We're not good enough. We're not valuable or deserving. And that can drive a whole host of emotional experiences that are very significant. Also, especially if we interpret that something negative has happened to this person, we can be very concerned for their well-being, again, heightening our emotional response. And we can imagine some of the behaviors we may engage in if we were worried that someone's lying in a ditch somewhere. We're going to text repeatedly. We're going to call their mom. We're going to call their best friend. We're going to call the police. We're going to check the hospitals. And that is in response to our emotion. And our emotion is in response to the thoughts that we're having and the way we're interpreting the situation. On the flip side, if we try to reappraise our automatic thought, again, I don't want to get rid of those automatic thoughts. It's okay to still have your first thought be they're in a ditch, they're mad at me, or I'm not important. We can't get rid of those overnight, but we can say that, okay, that's one thought. What else is possible here? Could this person be busy? Maybe they have back-to-back work meetings today. Maybe they're distracted. They have something going on personally and they're just not as engaged right now. Maybe they're away from their phone. I feel like that one's a little less likely since everyone's so connected anymore, but could be possible. Or maybe this person needs time to process. So maybe if your automatic response is that they're mad at you, maybe there is something that happened, a conflict, a tension in the relationship, and maybe this person is taking some time to pause before they reconnect. Those reappraisals drive a very different emotional response. I even feel better saying those than I did saying the previous ones. That thinking about the reappraisal actually supports us then having a very different emotional response. I'm not going to be calling local hospitals. I'm not going to be panicking and sending multiple text messages. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. Let's be friends. It's okay. I take it back. I'm going to pause. I'm going to breathe. I'm going to wait for more information. Same for the example if we are in the presence of someone who's always on their phone. It can feel very disengaging, very disconnecting. And if your automatic interpretation is, again, that that person is disinterested or rejecting of you, that you are not important because there's something more important in front of them, or that maybe that person is mad and is using this as a way to disconnect, that creates a very different emotional response. The emotional response could be more connected to, again, that panic, the desire to have to engage that person, or maybe it even would respond in you wanting to push away, lash out. That's all driven from an emotional place that is connected to the way we interpret the behavior. If we do a reappraisal and we say, okay, maybe this person doesn't think I'm important, is mad at me, is rejecting or disinterested, that could still be possible. But could it also be possible that whatever's on their phone right now is urgent or an emergency, that it's a family member that needs them to respond right away, that it's work related? They could also be distracted. They could also just be somebody who has a short attention span and is always multitasking. It could also be someone who's trying to regulate. How many people reach for their phone when they feel uncomfortable? How many people reach from their phone when they are understimulated or overstimulated? So many people. That has everything to do with the internal workings of the person and nothing to do with the person who's interpreting their behavior. But from the outside, we don't always know why people are feeling and doing what they're doing. So we automatically assume we know and we fill in the blanks. And our blanks tend to be filled in with automatic, judgmental, and sometimes driven by negative core beliefs that we have about ourselves. When we then see things from a possible reappraised perspective, we're able to pause, breathe, hold multiple things possible, and respond in a way to ask for more information potentially. And that's, well, again, we're not necessarily talking about behaviors. We're really focused in on the thoughts, but to bring it full circle, I want to also kind of point out that how we think and interpret a situation influences how we feel, which influences how we respond. So emotion-driven behaviors come from those uncomfortable emotions that we can't tolerate, that feel just too much, too intense, and are often interpreted by these automatic, or influenced by the interpretations that are automatic and judgmental and subjective. So if I'm interpreting someone's behavior as confirming and providing that confirmation of my core belief that I'm not good enough or I'm not worthy, I'm going to be more likely to shut down, isolate, withdraw, maybe even lash out, or you know what, just disengage, dissociate. Versus if I'm going to interpret someone's behavior and I'm going to override and reappraise my automatic interpretation, I may engage in something what we call an alternative action, which, even though we're feeling what we're feeling, instead of shutting down and withdrawing and disconnecting, I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to say, you know what? I really feel unimportant when you have your phone up while I'm talking to you. When you're on your phone and I'm trying to reach out to you, I feel unimportant, and I want to share that with you. The expression could be, and I need you to put down your phone when you're able so that we can be more connected. I want to feel connected to you. You can also set a boundary that that's something that I need you to do all the time. There's also some co-regulation that can show up, because if you're speaking to the person, sharing your interpretation or asking for more information to disconfirm your interpretation. There's some co-regulation that can happen. There's some connection, because I'm guessing that other person on the other side has their own set of automatic appraisals and interpretations that they have when they're in that exact same situation. So we want to encourage the reappraisal, the cognitive flexibility in these situations, so we allow ourselves to engage in alternative action, to draw connection, to get clarification, versus to isolate and withdraw, because we know connection is always going to be more supportive and beneficial to our overall mental health than isolation and disconnection. So that brings us to the end of our thoughts tutorial. We covered a lot. So again, I hope that you paused, took notes, tried out some of these appraisal, reappraisal interventions and strategies. And if not, feel free to come back to this as a resource and go through this again, practice, because whether you're struggling with mental health or it's something that you're trying to maintain, paying attention to our thoughts can have a huge impact on our ability to take care of ourselves and engage in our world in a way that supports our mental health through connection versus, can hurt our mental health through disconnection. So I hope that you found this beneficial and helpful and connective. Thank you so much for your time, and happy World Mental Health Day. Take care.